Hi everybody, do let me know when you can see and of course indeed hear me. Hello Susan and Laurie if you're on as well. Hope you're keeping well and enjoying enjoying some sunshine where you are. Hello Fran, hello KCM, Canada, Nashville, Susan with us, Natalie from the Netherlands. No, Mrs. John's not with us today. She's with her mum. It's her mum's birthday, so she's off doing that, having a nice day with her mum. So just me today, and hello Trist, hello Pauline. I just sent you a comment on your Facebook post, I don't know if you saw it yet, about Henri Fantin-Latour and his painting on the front of the New Order album. Anyway, you have a look at that later if you haven't seen it already. Video audio clear, thank you, Fran. Well, the good news is I'm going to dedicate this tour to a newly installed 5G mast, which is about 100 metres away from where I am now. And I know some people don't like 5G masts, but personally I love them because obviously it gives us a lot more to go roaming. So we're starting today on May Day on the moor for reasons that hopefully will become very, very clear once we get started. But previously there'd been a kind of dead spot in the middle of the moor, got buffering. Hopefully today we're not going to experience any of that. And oh god, I'm glad he saw that, Pauline. We're going to wander across Hobmoor and then down to the Knavesmire and into Knavesmire Woods. So maybe we'll see some bluebells. I know that you're being teed up by Leonie for some bluebells. I think Stefan mentioned them as well, so we'll see if we can find some as well today. So hopefully bucolic, pastoral, all those kind of things. Just about right, for May Day really, and all the kind of seasonal stuff that goes with it. So we're about on time. There's like one or two more people just drop in. Hello Mitzi, hello Carolyn, and Martin James Kelly. You're very welcome joining me here today in York, and Ava from Toronto. Finally cherry blossoms. There's cherry blossoms last week, Ava, but today you'll hopefully see plenty of flowers along the way. But yeah, if you have a look on my channel, Explore Yorkshire, you'll find cherry blossom from Harrogate, which was this time last week. But indeed you'll find me this time every week. At least for the summer, until it gets dark. So anyway, off we go. Frozen. Elizabeth, I don't think so for other people. Perhaps if you could just let me know, before I set off, if it's frozen. Don't think so, because I've got mega gazillions of 5G juice. In fact, I'm kind of feeling myself throbbing. There is that much kind of mobile data in the air. So I think maybe a screen refresh, Elizabeth. Hopefully that will see you right. So if everybody can just tell me that they are getting a nice signal and audio, they're all good here. So I think we're good. Elizabeth, it's lovely to see you. Haven't seen you for a while, and so great to have you on. And hopefully that will be a problem that is dealt with momentarily. So there we go. Right, fantastic. Elizabeth, all good now. Fantastic. So let's just flick around, and I want you to take a moment just to kind of let the wild moor settle around you, because it's an interesting location, obviously on the edge of a suburban area, but it's a patch of kind of ancient wild moor. Hello, Leslie. And May Day's always kind of begun like this, with a sense that you're sort of stepping out of ordinary times as we kind of leave the regular houses behind, and we step into this kind of wilderness at the centre of Dringhouses. You're stepping into something sort of older, something with a kind of long memory. Because I think we'll walk around this way. Because the 1st of May, and actually yesterday, but we're talking about today, is a kind of contradiction. It always has been. On the one hand, it's a kind of day of protest and marching, claimed by workers and unions, a day of banners and raised voices demanding a fairer world. But on the other hand, it's blossom and ribbons and dancing and flirting, flowers and doorways, and children running through the new grass. Two identities side by side, and both of them true. Hello, Ronnie. But before any of that, before the marches, before the maypoles, May Day was simply the moment when people felt the year turn, when winter finally loosened its grip and the cattle came out. The sun carried enough warmth to be trusted again. And so this moor is a kind of perfect place for us to begin. Hobmoor, a name that goes back to the old world. The hob, a spirit of the margins, a trickster, sometimes helpful, sometimes dangerous. And in later centuries, the idea kind of folded into the devil himself, the same root that gives us hobgoblin. Now, names like that don't survive by accident. They cling to places where people once felt the world was thinner underfoot. And as we walk the old paths here, the ones that predate the housing and the roads, they still form a rough pentagram across the moor. So I'm going to bring that up and hopefully you'll be able to discern what I'm talking about. I'll leave it up for a minute or two while you have a look. And hopefully you can see in the middle, you've got a 5-pointed star. Laid out with intent. Not announced, not recorded, but understood, a 5-pointed star pressed into the earth by people that knew this moor was not a place to cross carelessly. Paths chosen with precision, with purpose, angles measured against something, older than maps, until the shape settled into the ground like a sign left for those that could read it. So hopefully you can kind of pick that out. It's really quite incredible, but this is where we are now. This is obviously an aerial picture of that. Let me just dispatch that for us. Okay. So a star on the ground, drawn by habit as much as design, but still carrying that faint sense that this is a place where boundaries soften. So when people once said that May Day was a moment when the veil between worlds thinned, this is exactly the kind of landscape they were thinking of. A place where ordinary rules never held quite firm. And if you look around you now, you'll see something that ties this place to every May Day that came before it. The cattle are out. They were turned out to the moor only yesterday, as if tied to some older eternal clock. They arrived on May Day itself. Not by design, not for show, but because this is still the moment in the year when the land is ready for them, when the grass has the strength and the seasons tip decisively towards summer. Now, I'm not going to get too close, but we're going to stand here and take in the cows for just a moment. So for centuries, this was the hinge of the year. Winter wasn't a poetic idea. It was hunger, risk, and waiting. And when the cattle went out, it meant that the worst had passed. It meant the world had turned. So as we walk among them now, we're not just passing through a field, we're stepping into the same rhythm that shaped the Beltane fires, the protective flowers, the maybush, and all the customs that grew from the simple fact that summer had begun. Wise advice from Leslie there, casting our clout till maybe out. In other words, don't take any layers of clothing off because you'll catch a nasty chill. Real good old wives stuff there. Not suggesting for a second that Leslie's an old wife, but I'm sure she'll kind of get the reference. Old wisdom. Wisdom that's going to pass down from generation to generation. Not necessarily written down, so from our kind of oral culture. Yeah? Our culture, when we sort of say what is culture, we often talk about art and opera and all that sort of stuff, but really culture, isn't it? It's about behaviours. Shared understanding, shared meanings, shared beliefs, more than anything. So May Day is very much about English culture. So for our ancestors then, May Day wasn't just a date, it was the moment when the world changed gear. The land stepped into its kind of brighter half, and the story of that shift always began with a fire. So picture a hillside, not far away from here, 1,000 years ago. Cold air, a gathering of neighbours, and a carefully chosen pile of wood waiting for the spark that would mark the first day of summer. This was the Beltane fire, a fire believed to protect every living thing that it touched. So I've got an image here from a Beltane fire done recently. We'll just hold that up at the top while we talk about it. So before the Beltane fire was lit, every hearth in the village was extinguished. A whole community holding its breath. And then when the Beltane fire finally caught, the cattle were driven through the smoke. Now this wasn't for spectacle, there's a serious meaning of it. I haven't got a photo of this because it's obviously something that's not good for the cattle, so I wouldn't put up something that was problematic. But here's an AI image. I never normally use AI, but just for sorry, that's a rowan bush. I would never normally use AI on tours, but on this, because obviously we don't want to see cows with chronic breathing problems have been driven through smoke. So there's a kind of image, a cow sort of dressed up in kind of Mayday garb passing through. And the idea was that the smoke would guide them from sickness and misfortune in the months ahead. And of course, thinking about it, that was what wealth was in the country, wasn't it? Was animals that could pull a plough, that could provide meat, and so forth. So keeping your animals safe and well, keeping them out of the harm's way from witches and so forth, was an incredibly important part. Do you know what I mean? It could be the difference between thriving, surviving, do you know what I mean, and desolation and starvation. Was relationship with animals. So of course, trying to protect them was incredibly important. So when the flames died down, people marked the skin of the cows with the ashes from the Beltane fire. It was a sign of protection and of belonging to a community that had made it through winter. Now then, I'll get rid of that. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, we did the Easter tour. We'll leave the cows behind now, so we don't want to annoy them. We talked about Ash Wednesday, didn't we? And being marked, remember? The priests, after the fire that kind of marked with the ashes. So a similar kind of thing going on, one pagan, one Christian. But in effect, it's the sort of same process kind of going on there. It's a sign of protection. And in Ash Wednesday, it's obviously ahead of Lent, it's about atonement. In this case, it's about the animals and getting through winter, but it's a staging sign, isn't it? So I think there's an interesting parallel. It's also people haven't put their dogs on a lead near cattle. Yeah, it's a kind of grey area here because this is definitely an off-lead area, and people are told don't keep your dogs away, but those same things are both true at the same time. So it is. There we are. So anyway, after the fire came the feast, and in the Highlands they cook what they call a caudle, which is a mixture of eggs, butter, oatmeal, and milk, and they poured the first spoon, like a porridge kind of broth. They poured the first spoonful onto the ground as an offering. And then came what's known as the bannock. Okay, so this is a Beltane cake with 9 knobs, each thrown to protect a different animal, and a few tossed to the predators by way of acknowledging the world's dangers and asking them to keep the distance. So kind of leaving behind a tribute to the predators, saying, can we acknowledge you, and we're going to feed you and look after you, but in return, can you please go and eat our neighbours' animals rather than ours? I guess would be the underlying message there. But I'll just give you a kind of little panorama. Thank you, Leslie. So as you can see, we're just on the edge of a housing estate here, not far away from where I live at all. But at the same time, we've got this remarkable unswat. And there, by the way, I'm going to put that, if I just give you a little bit of zoom, that is a marvellous 5G mast that have just been put up just recently, which allows us to enjoy this without buffering. So if people moaning about 5G, remind them that without them, virtual tours are a bit of a non-starter. So right in the heart of Redstone District, we've got this ancient moorland. So one slice of this bantuk was marked with charcoal, and then there was a kind of draw, like drawing straws, that kind of thing. And whoever drew it had to leap through a fire 3 times while everyone pretended that they were being sacrificed. A reminder that summer always came at a cost. So kind of highly sort of symbolic gestures are being played out in and around May Day. But fire wasn't the only kind of protection. May Day was also a day of flowers. Not necessarily of decoration, but for defence. Yellow blossoms, primrose, gorse, hawthorn, marsh marigold were all hung above doors because they looked like flames. A warning to anything mischievous to stay out. Loose petals were scattered on thresholds, garlands tied to cow's horns, even milking tools decorated because dairy was believed to be especially vulnerable today. And you never gave away milk on May Day, not a drop, because people believed that giving away the milk on May Day was giving away the cow's luck for a year. So consequently, it could be vulnerable to predators or disease or old age or any of the kind of things, the problems that could beset your cow. So consequently, you weren't going to take away its essence, its energy source, which was the milk of May Day. Then there was the May bush, a small hawthorn or rowan that was brought indoors. I brought that image up before, so let's do that again so you can see it. So this is a decorated rowan bush. If you're familiar with the rowan tree, very much kind of back in vogue, rowan, these days. It almost sort of died out really as a sort of species of interest, but it's kind of right back now roaring back. And of course, if you Google rowan trees, you'll find out that very much associated with witchcraft, with Wicca. Not necessarily the damaging forms, but more some of the protective kind of charms and so forth. But right the way through history, it's kind of been one of the go-to plants as rowan for the wise women. Should we put them in that category? So many of which were benign, of course, some of which were downright awful. But rowan is kind of associated. It swims in those pools. So we decorate with ribbons, flowers, shells, sometimes candles. Shells are a bit controversial, aren't they, at the moment? 8647. I had to Google that, I didn't know what it meant. But anyway, so it might say that on there somewhere, I don't know. They might have put that about their old chieftains didn't like, spelling it out in shells, who knows. And often it was the oldest person in the house who dressed it. So again, this idea of renewal, of newness, birth, and old, the kind of the world turning circles. If you think there's been, either I kind of repeat myself, or I cover a lot of tours. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Fran. Where these same emblems of renewal, the old giving way to the new, etc. Sort of come through. They seem to be the eternal kind of beats, of our human existence, our history, is these finding ways to symbolise this passage between youth, birth, old age, and kind of back again, and it kind of interweaves. So you by doing this, you're bringing spring inside for the young. And it stayed up until the last day of the month. So again, it's like a Christmas tree, isn't it? The same idea that Christmas trees, if you remember, before we talk about Christmas tours, that they were initially, to appease the tree spirits in Viking culture, Scandinavian culture, who went off in winter wandering the earth as ghosts. So it's to entice them back in, these protective spirits. So again, different cultures, different times, different kind of languages. But it's this same idea that by harnessing nature and bringing it into your home, you can then get these connected kind of benefits. And obviously, it's a period where people would have felt a great deal closer to the world because they'd spend most of the time outdoors. The shelter that people had was really for sleeping and keeping out the bad weather. They weren't much living spaces. People would have afforded that amount of space. So it was much more of an outdoors kind of lifestyle that people would work and spend most of the time outdoors rather than indoors. So you bring it outdoors, indoors. So you got a whole month of summer standing in the corner of the room, assuming you had enough space, of course, to bring in a kind of rowan tree. So I guess that kind of predicates it, that suggests that you're not living, cheek by jowl, in a kind of tiny spot. So beneath all this, were the fair folk who were especially active around May Day. And they're not the tiny creatures of Victorian postcards, but older, stranger beings of hill, hollow, and of course moor. Hobgoblins, hobmoor, devils, these people, these creatures, Robin Goodfellow, these kind of trickster figures. So sometimes they'd be your friend, sometimes they would swindle from you, but they were especially potent at this time of year, when the atmosphere was said to be thin, and the veil between this world and the other world, you could literally put your hand sort of through it. So if people would do stuff to keep them sweet, to appease them, you'd leave milk on your doorsteps. They tied rowan to milk pails, and they placed 3 black coals under a butter churn to stop the fair folk stealing the butter. So, as I say, they are both welcomed because they are an intrinsic part of the year, but they also have to be kind of managed and appeased, distracted. So in a way, they are like a predator, really. To go back to what we were talking about just a couple of minutes ago, that you don't really know where you stand with them. You've got to ensure that they are sufficiently satisfied with what you're doing to kind of leave you alone and to kind of move on and to stay in their natural lair, which is where we are now, in the moorland. Now that at dawn on May Day, young women washed their faces in May Day dew. For beauty, clearly. So they were going to come out here on the morning, or this grass, wash your face in the fresh dew. But also, it's about protection. So we've got this sinister undercurrent. We've got the beginnings, we've got newness, but like a newborn baby, there's a vulnerability. Like a chick in a nest, it needs protecting. You know, I walked near those cows only because I knew they were there to graze. If they'd been anywhere near a calf, I wouldn't have gone near, because that's when they attack. Luckily, I've kind of grown up in areas, you know, for long enough to know when to leave kind of cows alone and when they're okay to go near. Because that protection of the young, the vulnerable, that's what causes the dangerous kind of behaviours. So we're talking about May Day, we're talking about a festival of hope. Fire to guard the animals, flowers to guard the home, food shared with spirits and neighbours, dew gathered at dawn, and a whole community stepping into summer together. So it's communal. A reminder that people have always used moments like this, moments that say the world is renewing itself and that you are part of that renewal. So I'm just going to get a sip of water. Hope you're enjoying it. We're about to leave this section of the moor to a sort of rather more cultivated section, cross Tadcaster Road, gone to the Naesmire, and head down to Naesmire Woods. But I hope you've enjoyed this first little wild section, as you might say. So if the earlier customs we were talking about protection, fire, flowers, quiet rituals, and I want to talk about where May Day kind of fully sort of steps into the light. Because once the cattle were safe, the boundaries guarded, the people turned to the business of celebrating. And nothing says celebration quite like a maypole. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the maypole, but let's bring up an image for you to feast your eyes on. It's the pole that held the sky up. So picture village green, a tall straight tree trunk raised upright in the centre, ribbons streaming from the top like captured sunlight. Now some say the maypole echoed the great world tree, the axes that held the heavens and the earth together. Others saw it as a symbol of summer's return, a way of honouring the trees that sheltered people through the winter. Some, of course, more recently, have suggested a kind of phallic representation. It may or may not be true. But whatever is the meaning, the maypole was the heart of the festivities. Children weaving in and out of the ribbons, tightening into bright spirals. Young people exchanging glances across the circle. A public dance, a public courtship. Now, in some villages, the maypole stayed up all year, a permanent reminder that joy had a rightful place in the landscape. Let's get ready. And the Queen of May was also the May Queen. We'll talk about next, because if the maypole was the heart, the May Queen was the season kind of made visible. So let's just stop for a moment to this comment. In maypole dancing had ceased by my time, and my old relatives recalled it. So yeah, I mean, it's within what you might call Leslie's lived lifetime experience. Not necessarily hers, but the old generation telling us stories about what happened when they were children. So it's within our oral tradition of understanding that this was kind of going on, dancing in maypoles. Now then, we might get a signal drop. I'm going to walk through onto this railway tunnel. So just bear with me, don't panic. If I go dead, I promise you I'll be back. But in order to get from one side of here, ooh, big clank, to the other, we've got to go under the railway tunnel. It's only about 30 metres, but if the signal drops, a bit buffering there. But right, okay, so May Queen. Yep, so the May Queen was a young woman who was chosen by the community. I've got a nice picture here. But I don't know how recent that picture is. It's got a nice sort of 70s kind of feel to it, which I rather like. Oops, didn't mean to put me on there. So there's a May Queen. So she's a young woman chosen by the community. She's crowned with flowers, dressed in white, but not for purity. It's not like a bride, but because white was the colour of blossom. And we're going to see some of that una momento. So white, then the blossom is the colour of beginnings. We talked about blossom last week. She didn't rule anything. Her role was simpler, and it was there to embody renewal. So it's this theme again about renewal and newness. So sometimes she walked with a May King or a Garland King, but the figure who endured most strongly was the Green Man. Have we come across the Green Man? Do let me know if you're familiar with the term the Green Man. There's a kind of leafy face that's carved into a lot of church woodwork. It's not stonework, but more usually kind of woodwork across England. So I'll bring you up a beautiful carving here of the Green Man. So he's kind of presented as a man who's got foliage for a face. He's kind of half wild, he's half holy. He's the kind of spirit of the rising sap and of returning life. So of the coming back to life after winter as a kind of metaphor for death, spring as a metaphor for birth and renewal, resurrection, all these kind of things, you know. So he is the beginning, he's the sap rising, which of course is fertility things, and of course fertility and blossom, you know, are ideal. So we've got a nice joint vision there, haven't we? Yeah, of that is hawthorn blossom, which is particularly associated with May Day. And I had got a picture of that in there, so I'm really, really pleased that I've just found some hawthorn blossom to show you this. If you're not familiar, it's got these very distinctive leaf shapes. And, you know, in a different world, in a different age, we were taught about leaf shapes and trees as children. Now it's all maths and English, which I think is great. Of course, we need these skills. But I'm not sure that children learn enough about nature to actually feel a part of it. And so I think that's then problems if you're then saying, right, we need to, you know, radically change some of our behaviours to protect the planet. If you don't kind of really feel part of it. So actually, I don't think that nature walks and learning about blossom and acorns and, you know, helicopters from sycamore trees and conkers, all these things are a waste of time. And we used to have chicks in our classroom as well every year. I think that they are, May and Hawthorn, the same thing, yeah. You know, that these are intrinsically important elements. And of course you need these other skills, but I think appreciation of the world around you, the world you live in, is critical for sort of citizenship. I don't think you want to go and destroy things and vandalise things if you feel part of something. So I'm all for kind of nature walks and all this something. But anyway, what else we got? So, because I fear I digress, and more than a trifle. Yeah, that is carved with that one. Yeah. Right. So, what else we got? Oh, the Jack in the Green. Yeah, if we come across the Jack in the Green, the walking bush. Jack in the Green is one of the most striking figures of May. So again, I've got another image for you here. So we're on what we call Little Hobmore now, by the way. More kind of better behaviours of Hobmore. No devils here. So there he is. I'm going to leave that for a minute because you have to look at it kind of closely to pick out his kind of facial features and this, that and the other. But basically it's a wooden frame that's shaped like a bell, covered entirely in leaves, hawthorn, birch, oak, and there's a dancer hidden inside, with the feet kind of just visible beneath the greenery. So presumably you wouldn't want it to be a very hot day when you're doing that, but it looks pretty warm there. So Jack danced through the streets, shaking his leafy skirts, bringing the wildness of the woods into the heart of the town. Now some see him as an older tree spirit, traditions, you know, others as a cousin of the Green Man. But obviously whatever his origins, Jack of the Green was a well-beloved walking burst of spring, unstoppable, exuberant and alive. Now another lovely tradition of the May Day celebrations was the Obiorse. I don't know if you've heard of Obiorse. This particular one is in Padstow, and he's basically mischief on four legs. The most famous, as I say, is in Padstow, and basically it's a great sort of circular frame draped with black cloth, and then a horse's head jutting outside at the front and a tail at the back. And the dancer inside kind of lunges and sways and snaps the horse's jaws, chasing people through the streets, sometimes sweeping someone under the skirt of his costume. And if you were caught, you emerged with soot, a kind of mark of luck or mischief depending on who you asked. So again, there's this sort of slightly kind of predatory, slightly dangerous sense about these celebrations. Something wild and proud. If you ever watched, what's that film, Wicker Man, you're kind of right in that territory. That is really deep, rich mining of this kind of really sort of strange, wonderful, but also really a little bit unsettling English customs associated with spring, renewal, the harvest and so forth. So if you haven't seen Wicker Man, do. Hello, Linda. I didn't realize you were joining us today. So Padstow even had two rival horses, the Old Oss and the Blue Ribbon Oss, and their supporters take the rivalry very seriously. So remind me, what's that blossom there? I'm not very, very good with everything. Beautiful, delicate little flowers. And of course this looks to be apple blossom over here. So we've then got, of course, the dancers who greet the dawn. The Morris dancers. They have a bit of a bad rap at times, but they're an important part of all this. So up before sunrise, bells strapped to their shins, sticks in hand, ready to dance the summer in. Have a look at that. Isn't that something? So Morris dancing is older than it looks. The first written record appears in 1448, when the Goldsmiths Company in London paid 7 shillings to a troupe of Morris dancers, which was a pretty respectable sum in those days, even in the 15th century, because people valued a good performance. Now, I'm dropping no hits whilst over here, but throughout history, people have rewarded the entertainers. Just saying. You know, and that goes all the way back to the Romans, who would throw coins for the gladiators, the jugglers and the acrobats, and the storytellers. There's a rich tradition of rewarding those who entertain us. But we'll move on. So what's interesting about May Day is it's a festival that belongs to everyone. How kind of democratic it is. The Maypole belongs to the dancers. The May Queen belongs to the community. Jack in the Green belongs to the woods. The hobby horses belong to the mischief makers. The dancers belong to the dawn. Everyone has a part to play. Everyone has their moment in the sun. So we're now going to be on our way walking towards the woods. And hopefully you can kind of feel the same energy in this tour that May Day is meant to be about. A sense that the world is ready to burst into celebration and that the season is turning. That joy is not just permitted, but expected. Because May Day at its heart is a festival of abundance. A festival that says there's now enough light, enough warmth, enough hope for all of us. And that, of course, is worth dancing for. So with all the kind of dancing, the green, it'd be easy to imagine May Day as nothing more than a joyful, slightly eccentric spring festival. Ribbons, revelry, a bit of mischief to brighten the farming year. But beneath the celebration ran something far more serious. Something that touched every part of village life. Something that made May Day powerful and to the authorities unsettling. Because May Day mattered. Not symbolically, not nostalgically, but practically. In a world without forecasts, without reliable harvests, without the safety nets we take for granted, custom was the architecture of survival. It told people when the cattle could safely go out, when the land was waking, and when the unseen forces of the season were restless, and when the community needed to act as one. Custom wasn't decoration, it was the operating system of a village. And May Day was the moment when the whole community stepped into the new season together. It wasn't optional, it wasn't a hobby, it was a ritual that said, we've made it through the dark, we will face the light together. Was it superstition? Well, not in the modern sense, no, not really. To our ancestors, the world is alive, full of forces that could help them or harm them, depending on how you treat them. Oh, some bluebells there. Fire protected, flowers guarded, dew healed, trees blessed, milk nourished. And the fair folk remind you that the world was bigger than you were. These weren't childish beliefs. They're a way of making sense of a world that could be generous one year and cruel the next. And crucially, custom worked because everybody did it together. A single family couldn't protect the cattle by walking them through the smoke if the rest of the village didn't join in. A single household couldn't keep mischief at bay if the neighbours left their doors unguarded. Custom was collective magic. Its power came from unity. So who led these rituals? Well, it wasn't priests, it wasn't magistrates, it wasn't landowners, because custom belonged to the people. The Beltane fire was lit by whoever had the knowledge, often older women, sometimes shepherds, sometimes the person known to have the lucky hand. The May Queen was chosen by the community. The maypole was raised by the young men of the village, with help from anyone strong enough to hold a tree upright. The May bush was decorated by the oldest person in the household. A detail that shows how deeply these traditions were rooted in family memory. I'm going to try and come over here and cross over to Tadcaster Road now. So we're leaving Hobmore, going to join the Knavesmire. So these are bottom-up rituals, folk rituals, rituals that didn't need permission. And that, of course, is where the trouble began. Because the church had a complicated relationship with May Day. It tried to absorb the festival. May become the month of Mary. And in the 20th century, St. Joseph the Worker was placed on the 1st of May as a deliberate counterweight to the socialist May Day. But in the medieval and early modern periods, the church was uneasy. May Day was communal, joyful, physical, sensual, and not under clerical control. It involved dancing, drinking, flirting, disappearing into the woods, and rituals older than Christianity. The church tolerated some of it, condemned other parts, and tried to Christianise the rest. But the truth was simple. May Day was simply too popular to ban and too pagan to bless. And the authorities and the state alike worried for another reason. May Day was a moment when ordinary people took control of the public space. The maypole stood in the centre of the village. The procession filled the streets. The hobby horses chased people at will. The green man danced wherever he pleased. The community chose its own May Queen. The rules of everyday life loosened. And symbolically talking about this here, let's pause a second and spin us round to tell you that we are at the very spot of Tyburn, a place of public execution, a place where, amongst others, Dick Turpin met his end. So in a society that knew ultimately to enforce its rules, it had the rope. It's interesting to see how the ways it tried to stifle May Day customs. Because they were deeply worried that once the hierarchy softened, when the world turned upside down, when the young had power, when the poor had joy, when the landlords had a festival that belonged to them, that everything might just change. And in that change, they would see their position go from being at the top to being at the bottom. So you'll see the threats. So because if people can gather to dance around a pole, they can gather to demand other things too. If they can choose a May Queen, they can imagine choosing other leaders. And if they can celebrate without permission, they can question why permission is needed at all. Can you see how there's a sort of subtle underlying danger? And that is why May Day concerned the powerful, not because it was quaint, not because it was harmless, but because it was a festival of unity, a festival that said the community belongs to itself. And that's the kind of perfect place for us to kind of step into the next part of the story, the moment when joy kind of met politics and the festival itself almost vanished. So I'm just going to take a sip of water to hope you're enjoying today's tour. So obviously we're moving now on to Naesmire. We've got the architecture of the racecourse behind us, and rather in front of us, and we're going to head down on the Naesmire and go and see Naesmire Woods, because it seems to me that it's very woodlands. So do hope you're enjoying these big open vistas, places and skies big enough for all these big ideas that I'm kind of throwing at you. So just to kind of get your bearings in, so we've got York Racers in front of us. If we sort of spin around this way, the City of York Centre is in that direction. We're going over in this direction. We're going to follow the racetrack down, and we're going to talk about all the efforts that were made to get rid of this pesky May Day. Didn't like it one bit. So, for centuries, May Day belonged to people and their customs, their fires, their dances, their way of stepping into summer together. But the very things that made it powerful also made it unsettling for those who preferred the world tidy, orderly, and of course, under control, their control, of course. And so slowly at first, but then with real force, May Day found itself in the crosshairs. The first cracks appeared long before Cromwell, long before the Puritans, but of course it was the Puritans that really sought to stick the boot into this. Clergy complained the maypole drew bigger crowds than the church. Magistrates grumbled that when dancing went on too long, the drinking was too enthusiastic, the young people altogether too delighted with one another's company. There were sermons against lewd customs and ungodly gatherings, mutterings that the green man looked suspiciously pagan and the hobby horses encouraged misrule. They had a point, but nobody dared ban May Day outright. The people loved it too fiercely until the 16th century. Because in 1517, London erupted on May Day. The celebration's already tense because of economic hardship. And of course, there's no better way to be proven time and time again. People that are hungry are angry. And on this particular May Day in 1517, this tension spilled into violence. The crowd surged through the streets attacking foreign merchants in what became known as Evil May Day. The authorities panicked. 14 people were hanged. We've just walked past a place of execution. 14 people were hanged. Hundreds more were sentenced to death before Henry VIII intervened and pardoned them. It was a turning point. For the first time, May Day was seen not just unruly, but as politically dangerous. A day when crowds could gather, when grievances could surface, when the usual order could be overturned. The maypole was no longer just a pole, it had become a symbol of collective power. And then, in the 17th century, a century of very little patience for merriment of any kind. To the Puritans, May Day was everything they disliked. Noisy, sensual, communal, rich in old beliefs, and defiantly joyful. They called maypoles stinking idols. They called the dancers heathenish vanity. They called the customs popish, pagan, and profane. And Marlena's here. This is right up your street, Marlena. If you've just joined us, do skip back at the end and have a listen, because it's very much, not many houses on this one, but lots and lots about the old ways of people, the Wiccan and so forth. In 1644, Parliament banned maypoles outright. Not discouraged them, banned them. But bear in mind they were banning Christmas at the same time, so it wasn't that this was kind of a particularly, strange thing to do. It was the Puritans going through and going, that's not Christian, that's not Christian, that's not Christian, that's Catholic, get rid of it. And so it was an attempt to cleanse. It was like our version of the sort of Chinese Cultural Revolution. Or perhaps the McCarthyism in the United States in the 1950s of like, let's get rid of the undesirable elements. Let's purge our society of the bits that don't make us feel wholesome and clean and safe. And the maypoles, unfortunately, fell down. They were chopped down. The bonfires were extinguished. Dancing was forbidden. Jackie and the Green disappeared. The hobby horses fell silent. And for 15 whole long years, May Day all but vanished. So imagine that, a festival older than Christianity, older than the English state itself, snuffed out by decree. And then, just as suddenly as it had vanished, May Day returned. Because when Charles II was restored to the throne in 1660, he understood something essential. People needed joy. They needed colour. They needed the old customs that made them feel like themselves. So he had some lovely buttercups down here. So he ordered a maypole to be raised in London's Strand. A colossal pole over 40 metres high, towering above the rooftops. It was a statement, a declaration, a promise. The pole stood for nearly 50 years, and across the country villagers followed suit. Maypoles reappeared, dancing returned. Jack of the Green shook off the dust, the hobby horses galloped again, and the festival breathed. May Day had survived. And it survived because it was never just a party. It was identity. It was memory. It was the community seeing itself reflected in firelight and flowers. It survived because people recognised that joy is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And it survived because no decree, no sermon, no ban, no scolding could extinguish the simple truth that the turning of the year is worth celebrating. And I'm just going to get a sip of water. Heading towards the woods now. We're going to start now talking about some of the delightful customs around different parts of the UK. So again, let me know if you've heard of some of these. I'd be amazed if any have crossed the Atlantic, but you never know, because the folk that got in those boats in the 17th century, they were English people, and they may well have taken some of these strange behaviours. So if you are listening on the other side of the Atlantic and you recognise these, well, that's almost certainly how they came your way. So, I want to talk about some sort of quirky, delightful, sort of beautifully human customs that grew up around May Day in every corner of the country. This isn't a York story now, this is just about obviously May Day in general. So, obviously we've kind of walked, haven't we, now through the great sweep of May Day. The fires, the flowers, the dancing, the politics. Thank you, Elizabeth, that's very kind of you. But one of the joys of the festival was how wildly different it looked from one corner of the country to another. Every region added its own flavour, its own mischief, its own way of greeting the summer. And some of these customs are kind of wonderfully strange. So May birching, which is messages on the doorstep in parts of northern and central England, people woke up on May Day morning to find a twig or a flower left on the doorstep, a kind of seasonal calling card. But it wasn't random. Every plant carried a message. A pear branch, we were doing Victorian language right last week. So this is kind of an antecedent of the Victorian flower language. So a pear branch meant fair, a compliment. Rowan meant Wiccan, a term of affection. A briar meant liar, a gentle accusation. Gorse meant slut, but not in the kind of modern sense. It meant kind of a slut was somebody who was kind of slovenly and careless and the house wasn't kind of clean. Some of you might be aware of that kind of older term, what sort of slut meant before it took on the kind of sexual sort of shaming sort of side of things. It was sort of somebody who lived slovenly. They didn't clean the house properly, they didn't look after the dress and wash the children's clothes. That was what a slut was historically in English language. And a thorn, if you got a thorn on your doorstep, then people didn't like you. So you could use it kind of plants to insult people and wave them money off. How nice to be insulted on May Day, but there you go. So a village's personality could be laid out in petals and prickles, a kind of whole social map drawn in twigs. They used to put posties in baskets on doorknobs. So this case, and was that in Tennessee, or was that when you were living somewhere else previously? So is that a kind of Tennessean thing? So collecting the May dew. So we talked about earlier about on the morning of May Day, maidens would come out to a place like this, lots of grassland, and wash their face in the May dew. Partly for good beauty treatment, but more it was about protection. There was some innocence in the dew of kind of May Day morning. So across Britain, women rose before dawn to collect the May dew, gathering it from grass, hedges, stone walls, letting it drip into jars, or simply washing their faces in it. We're told that Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife, did it in 1515. And Samuel Pepys, the great diarist of the 17th century, complained that his wife and maids woke him at 3 in the morning to go out and gather it. So the dew was believed to keep the complexion youthful, clear blemishes, protect against sunburn, and bring luck for the year ahead. And even now, if you climb to Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh at 4 in the morning on May Day, you'll still see people washing their faces in the dawn dew. So just coming up now towards the woods, you can sort of see in front of you. If you ever watch racing from York, you'll recognise the familiar backdrop from Days by Woods, which is where we're heading down towards. So some customs never quite die. We've got May Goslings. So the Northern April Fool's version is May Goslings. A day for pranks. It wasn't April Fool's Day, it was May Goslings, which was May the 1st. So on April the 1st, it was May the 1st. Interesting, huh? Young men would creep out early to swap shop signs, move carts, hide tools, and generally kind of cause good-natured chaos. And anyone who fell for a prank was called a May Gosling. And the rule was simple: all mischief stopped at midday, because even chaos had to have boundaries. You've then got the Hone ram roast, a kind of taste of the old ways of Dartmoor in the village of Hone. May Day kind of once began with a ritual that feeds straight out of the ancient world. Before dawn, young men went up onto the moor to find a ram lamb. They brought it back and tied it to a sanding stone and sacrificed it. The meat was roasted and shared among the villagers. A raw Beltane echo. Today, Honey still holds a May Day fete, but the ram is spared, and the only thing roasted is a barbecue. You've then got the Randwick map, which is all about cheese, both of this. And about in the village of Gloucestershire, Randwick, celebrates with the WAP. And let me get a picture from this, the Randwick WAP. Where are we? There's a lady there, we look. And maybe it could be our friend, couldn't it, from Tbilisi, that. Anna. Rolling a cheese. So it's a cheese rolling event that dates back at least the 14th century. So 3 wheels of cheese were decorated at dawn and carried in procession around the churchyard. They were rolled 3 times around the church, taken to the green and shared with the villagers. So blessed and of course picked up of the dew from the ground. So today the WAP is going to full procession with a WAP mare, WAP queen and a mop man who wets the ground as he goes. And the WAP mare is ceremoniously dunked in a village pond because nothing says summer here quite like a fully clothed official being dropped into cold water. So again, you've kind of got this sense, of hierarchy being sort of undermined, vilified and made a fool of on May Day. Then we've got rowan branches. So close to home in Cleveland in Yorkshire, the 2nd of May today was once marked by a quiet but powerful ritual. At dawn, 1 person from each household went out to gather rowan branches, the great protective tree, the tree that kept away witchcraft, mischief, and anything that wished to do you harm. The branches were fixed above every door and left out there until they naturally fell. It was a simple act, but one that said this house is guarded, this family is safe. Summer may come. A patchwork of joy is what I love about these customs, and how kind of human they all are. Some playful, some protective, some mischievous, some ancient. Echoes of rituals long forgotten, but still part of this culture, this identity. And all of them speak of the same impulse, I think it's important to say. The desire to mark the turning of the year, to step into the light together, to say we are part of this land and this land is part of us. Which brings us to the next movement, which is about when blossom meets the banners. So we began our walk with a kind of contradiction about the heart of May Day, the ribbons and the protest, the blossom and the banners. And before we close, it's worth asking a kind of simple question really. Why May Day? Why did the Labour movement choose this date? Out of all the days in the year, it wasn't a coincidence, it wasn't convenience, it wasn't even random. The choice was deliberate. It was symbolic and deeply rooted in older meanings of the day. The day that already belonged to the people. For centuries, May Day had been a festival of ordinary people. A day when ordinary people in communities gathered, when they danced, shared food, raised their own leaders, and marked the turning of the year in their own terms. It didn't belong to kings, it didn't belong to bishops, it didn't belong to landowners. It belonged to the village. I'm going to duck onto this so we can get down towards the woods. And the people whose hands kept the world turning. So when the Labour movement looked for a date to mark solidarity, dignity, and the hope of a fairer world, they chose the day that always carried those meanings. So May Day is the moment when the world renews itself. When the land wakes, the cattle go out, and the year steps into its bright half. For the Labour movement, that symbolism mattered. A day of renewal became a day of renewal. A day of hope became a day of hope. A day when communities stepped into the light together became a day when workers stood together for their rights. The old meanings and the new meanings feel like two halves of the same story. It was a day that couldn't be owned. But there's another reason. May Day was already too deeply rooted to be erased. It had survived bans, sermons, Puritan crackdowns and centuries of superstition. It refused to be tidied away. A day like that was the perfect home for a movement that believed ordinary people deserved a voice. So two traditions, one thread. So when we talk about May Day today, the blossom, the banners, the dancing, the demonstrations, we're not talking about two separate festivals. We're talking about one long tradition of people gathering to mark the turning of the year, to celebrate community, to hope for better days, and to remind the world that the future belongs to all of us. So as we're coming towards the end of our walk, we haven't quite made it as far as the woods yet, but we've got 5 minutes, hopefully we'll manage to get there before we close down. Let's just sort of take a moment to listen. I'll just be quiet for a second, and just hopefully you can hear some of the nature, the bird song around us, the rustle of the leaves. It's the sounds of the quiet shift of a season. As spring leans into summer. Because in the end, this is what May Day has always been about. The turning of the year and our place within it. For thousands of years, people have marked this moment with fire and flowers, with dancing and dew. Rituals sometimes solemn, sometimes joyful, often a little strange. But beneath all the variety, there's a single thread running through every May Day custom. A thread that says the world is renewing itself and that we are part of that renewal. And that's what's remarkable, is this instinct hasn't faded. Every year on Calton Hill in Edinburgh, thousands gather for the Beltane Fire Festival. And for those that don't know, that's above Arthur Seat, above Edinburgh, the volcano. And this photo isn't from yesterday, it's an old picture, but it is taken at the Beltane Fire Festival in Edinburgh. It looks absolutely stunning, doesn't it? It could be an ancient Rome temple rather than a kind of Victorian piece of sort of neoclassicism. But look how powerful it looks. You know, we're drawn to it, aren't we? There's something elemental about an image like that. It makes us feel like we wish we were there in the crowd, even though it means getting up in the middle of the night to see in the dawn. But what a way to see in the dawn, this modern reimagining of ancient rites. With drummers, dancers, torchbearers, the May Queen and the Green Man, all moving through us, through the crowds, all moving towards the fire as the city watches. This isn't a reconstruction. It isn't nostalgia. It's a living ritual created by people who feel the old stories still speak, that the turning of the year still deserves to be marked, and that fire and community still have something to teach us. Get rid of that for you. Nearly there was. Just make it for a minute. And the crowds who gather, students, families, artists, people of every background come because something in them recognises the need to reconnect with the land, with the seasons, with the rhythm older than electricity and concrete. Because in a world that feels increasingly fragile, there's a deep desire to rediscover a more harmonious relationship with nature, with agriculture, with the planet that sustains us. May Day offers that, and it always has. Because it's the festival that belongs to everyone. And because of this, May Day has survived bans, sermons, politics, and centuries of shifting belief. Because it has never belonged to any single institution. It has always belonged to the people, to the villagers that raised the maypoles, to the families that decorated the maybush, to the dancers who greeted the dawn, to the young women gathering the dew, to the crowd on Calton Hill watching the fire leap into the night. And here today, finally, as we arrive in the woods, we're stepping that same tradition, not to recreate the past, but to honour the simple truth that the year is turning and that we are turning with it. I want to give you a little glimpse of the woods, because I did promise, but just before we wrap up this disappearing, have a look at that, an image of sunrise on May Day over Hobmoor. Not this year, but hopefully you agree. It is a pretty stunning image. So I want to say happy May Day, really, and welcome to summer. And where better for us to finish our time together than in the woods. I do hope that has been a stimulating and an interesting tour. I hope that it's been full of, oh, I didn't know that moments, which is what I was trying to do. Giving you a sort of connection to, you know, modernity, ancient traditions, and just the kind of fun stuff, really, kind of quirky stuff. Probably left thinking the English are very, very strange people. For those that live on the other side of the Atlantic or elsewhere, we are. But this stuff's buried deep within us. It is our culture, it's our humanity that is expressed at times in ways that are very, very strange. But there's something, I think, very reassuring that peel off the layers of modernity, take away the fact that I'm talking to you across the other side of the world, that someone like me could have been telling these stories in these woods, on that moor, right, any time in the last 1,000 years. And it would have made absolute sense. People would have got and understood what we're talking about. So it's a straight line. As I kind of give you the final kind of visual, the centre path here in Knavesmire Woods, this is the straight line that runs back to our past, to a shared past that we have, irrespective of where you are, you know, in the world, kind of where your ancestors came from, that we all emerged from peoples, I mean, that lived from the land, that learnt to stop moving, to stop being nomadic, and to farm. And the very act of learning to farm meant listening to the planet, listening and watching and living within the seasons. And that's what May Day is. It's a celebration of the turning from one season into another. And as such, you know, it's traditions and ideas that last for thousands of years. So there we go. That is my May Day story. I do hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you everybody who's left a tip. If I missed saying thank you at the time, I do apologise, and will do my very, very best to give you a shout out on the Facebook page because obviously I do very much appreciate the support, and it is a lot of hours to write this stuff, so it's not just a case of coming out and talking for an hour. It's actually having an hour's worth of material that's worth talking about. Is the difference, I think, between not only the colleagues that still do it now, but some of the people that fell by the wayside in years gone by. I feel like I could just stand there with a camera and just go hi and take it from there. But that's not my way. I like to research, write, and increasingly, because of my crappy memory, I use prompts so along the way, so I don't forget stuff. But it gives me more of a kind of free flow, because I'm not going so hopefully it gives a better delivery. So there we go. I will just spin the camera. We're a shade over 6 o'clock, 2 minutes past 6. But I think that was a really nice tour. I really enjoyed that, and I hope you did too. And I look forward to seeing you this very Saturday, or rather next Saturday, at the same place. And hopefully we're now getting a sense that Live at 5 is something we can rely on. And I look forward to seeing you all very much next week. So thank you, Trish. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'll see you all very, very soon. And goodbye.